Hang on. What about now? Oh, we're probably gonna turn the music off. So YouTube doesn't yell at us.
Oh, can it tell right away?
Right away.
That's very sweet.
Oh.
Big Brother state.
It can't tell. So I know you were saying that you were using the archive.org collection.
It flagged that stuff too.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So it's up to date on what music is in the database, but it's not up to date on what's public use.
Yes. That means getting copyright then in protecting
Protect everything.
public domain
Yeah, it's
use.
better to just wait. That sounds like a recording.
If I sang really, really well, do you think it would be
Yeah, it
okay?
would totally block you. Then.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Yay! How's the sound?
It's good.
Yay! Stupid OBS.
Oh, wait. You wanted that on record?
Okay.
Is Wiretap also free? Wait.
Yeah,
Wirecast.
Wirecast.
Wiretap. Sounds sketchy.
Very obvious.
Get it off the dark web.
So it's okay. It's not great, but it's better than it was.
All right, we'll take it.
All right.
What's the downside of the last one?
Oh,
Hey.
it was pretty
I
awful.
didn't understand what was happening.
Oh no.
We heard you had trouble yesterday, but we put you down as being in attendance anyway.
Yeah, sorry, we had trouble with the audio.
Hello, Cliff. All right. We do thousands of these, so we'll edit me out and then introduce yourself.
Great.
There you go.
Fabulous.
Great.
You're not gonna put the bring a friend commentary on the internet for the world to see?
No. Well, maybe I did that now. Welcome to our active teaching lab today. We have labs and exchanges and teaching effectively in Canvas, and labs include socializing and introductions. Hopefully you've all done that, grabbed a bagel, some coffee, things like that. We have an instructor story that we've invited in, and we asked them to share what it was that they wanted to do with technology and teaching. What they tried, what happened, what they would do next time, sort of a lessons learned. We'll have a hands-on activity afterwards with an activity sheet that we should all make sure that you grab. Over there. If you're logged into our course already, and if you haven't logged into our course, this little piece of paper back there will get you in. That gives you the electronic version of the activity sheet, so you can follow along with live links and things like that. That's what we're going to do today. Yesterday we had an exchange. Thursdays from 1 to 2 we have an exchange. We invite an instructor to come in and do the same thing. Usually these are topics that don't lend themselves well to hands-on activities. So we'll kick that part off. And then we also have the teaching effectively things that we do at the end of the semester. You'll notice that all of our initiatives are really more on the strategy side, although there's always technology involved in that spectrum. Our schedule is on the back there. Please pick it up. Open in the office. We're about halfway done now with the semester. Let's see. We've got that course that I already talked about. We've been doing this for a while. This is our 7th semester. 134 sessions by the end of the semester. It's kind of a growing body of work, which is kind of cool. We're live streaming this right now, we think. Audio and video, both. But we want you to come here because UVI was on our live stream yesterday, and it wasn't as good, was it? No, their audio was bad. But she also didn't get any of the ear stones that we had. Let's see. The good news, though, is if you like what you see, you can share it with somebody else within a couple of days afterwards, and say, "Oh, you should have gone to this," and but since you didn't, we can finish up on it here. As with many of our programs on campus, we have quantitative measures, so please bring a buddy so that we can count you and say, look, we're important. Also, please fill out this little green it is today. Evaluation at the end of the day, and tell us how we're doing. If you learned anything, any ideas to make this a better session, to get more people, etc. And if you come several times, you should have a name tag that you can just leave on the back there. And what is like your music now? There it is. All right. Oh, she's setting up. Let me also do pitch for the Blended UW program. It is now taking applications. Learn how to blend your course better, and you get a stipend, I think, or something. Maybe it's not a stipend, but you get money towards blending your course that you can use with our online course production people. And then Sid Freitag, as part of the Learning Analytics presentation series, is doing a thing on infographics and data visualizations on March 20th, so coming up the week before spring break.
Hi, my name is Naomi Salmon. I have historically been an instructor in the English department, teaching writing classes and literature classes, but my main experience with Canvas Outcomes is with a small group of 19 students who have a thrice weekly meeting with me. And so one of the things I'm going to be talking about today is this really rarefied context for using learning outcomes and how that changed the way that I thought about grading as an instructor more generally. But one of my main goals today is to actually ask you about your own insights about how Canvas learning outcomes might translate into, say, a larger class or a class in a different subject. So I'm going to give you that minimalist approach to Canvas outcomes. I'm going to discuss the sort of pedagogical aspects of this. And then I'm going to draw upon your expertise. But the very first thing I want to do is kind of give you just the basic visual of what learning outcomes are. So I'm going to navigate out to my class Canvas page. Learning outcomes provide you a way to articulate your own standards for a course in really flexible ways. So you can assign points for development in terms of the refinement of a student's work in a particular category. This is kind of like a hyped up rubric. You can also just designate overarching desired qualities that you want your students to understand over the course of the semester. So like one of your course objectives is to say, hey, at the end of this course, you're going to be able to generate a really focused thesis statement. Or you're going to be able to use sources appropriately. You can kind of hammer that point home by attaching these learning outcomes to each of the assignments that require those skill sets. And it's pretty simple to make those outcomes. You go to the learning outcomes bar, you type in your outcome, so course participation, and then you can provide descriptors. And then you can assign points and grading methods for each of the instances of a student's performance on these outcomes. I'll tell you right away that I think that one of the advantages for me in using course outcomes is to throw away all of the grading materials. So I always change these sections to 0 points across the board. And I'll kind of talk about why that is coming up. But in a course that required a different kind of mastery demonstration, I think it would be really interesting to learn more about how students responded to this numerical assessment of qualitative statements about their learning. So to get to that discussion of why it is that I toss out the grading mechanisms whenever I can, I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what my course was like. English 100 is intended to be a composition course for first-year students at UW. Sometimes you have sophomores or transfer students, but it is a way of trying to teach college writing and research skills at a kind of introductory level, or to address students who are in FIGs that require them to do a lot of writing and sort of support that effort. So it's kind of a high-touch class. You have multiple one-on-one conferences that are required, and students are often likely to come in to talk with you multiple times during the semester independent of those conferences. The course materials are readings and conversations and multiple sort of scaffolding assignments that all get revised into a portfolio that students compose at the end of the sequence. There are 3 sequences. And the explicit objectives of the course are to emphasize process, experimentation, and pushing yourself to new levels as a writer, coming from a position of many different strengths across the course context. So the course involves 3 different sequences that each train students to do slightly different things. It starts with a narrative sequence, whose objective is to ask students to tell a story, but the real tested skills are understanding audience contexts and identifying a purpose for their work and kind of managing a lot of information in a way that coheres. So then they transition in what can seem to them to be a very speedy shift between course objectives to a research and information literacy section, where they try to understand what sources are reputable and what their college resources are for finding appropriate sources. And then they generate a research topic, and they compose 2 different types of persuasive arguments with that topic in mind that they've been researching from about a third of the way through the semester. So they create an academic essay and a video, and I'm aware of a lot of the challenges that come with different assessment methods and different expectations for each of these sequences. One of the difficulties of being an instructor in this course is that you're not communicating in the same way in any different sequence. So as someone who was expected to grade these students, I would come up with these really frustrating grading challenges. It really made me struggle because giving critique and giving feedback is an act of generosity. But when you say, this story that's very personal is C-level work, that's not translating to that act of generosity. And the research sequence, I didn't want students to play it safe with the materials that they were drawing from and constantly turn to Merriam-Webster, because it's actually a really good thing when students misstep with their research materials. And if you say you're a bad researcher or you got a C on this annotated bibliography, to me it kind of communicates this, I guess, lack of awareness of the real victory it is when you get to have a conversation about how you trusted the wrong kind of source. Great, you caught that. In the argument section, I also felt that grades were ineffective, letter grades and numerical grades, because to me, saying I am the objective mind who assesses the quality of your work is a little bit disingenuous when the class is all about approaching different audiences. And I'm not that audience for most of these students. When they try to express arguments in the future, I'm not the mind that they're trying to convince. And added to that, the revision and overarching process of gathering materials together and trying to demonstrate that they had really changed the way they wrote created grading problems for me, because writing is not really a science in a way that can be distilled into multiple different components on a rubric that are each numerically graded. Usually if students have a problem with their argument, it's not, their thesis is independently messy, and so is their evidence, and those can be quantified in separate aspects, and the organization of their paper is a whole separate element. The argument that they present in their thesis and the evidence that they draw from and the organization of their paper work together to make something more or less effective. And so that distillation process took me a lot of time as an instructor. So I would sit there and be like, in my rubric, it's 5 points for evidence and it's 5 points for organization, but this is both of those things. Do I take away points from both to communicate that they need to work on both of them, or do I try to prioritize by just taking it away from evidence? And eventually I kind of realized that I could throw that frustration away and hopefully communicate better with my students by shifting the way we talked about assessment in my class. And so I imported a contract grading structure into my course. And contract grading can mean a lot of different things to different instructors, but typically it involves stating to students in advance what the objectives are for work that meets certain standards in the class and asking them to commit to one of those sets of standards or arrays of student work over the semester and saying, I will help you to revise and revise and revise until you make it to that benchmark that you've set for yourself, but you are going to commit to trying to do all of this work and communicating with me frequently to try and make sure that you are understanding the different benchmarks. So it can involve a course-wide grading roster where you sort of say, here are the assignments that you need to do at a satisfactory level, at A level, B level, C level, etc. Or it can involve what they call specifications grading. It's kind of presenting a rubric in advance. But all of the different approaches to contract grading create a need to communicate more with your students about what it means that you are asking them to demonstrate XYZ capabilities in each assignment. So contract grading can be great in that respect, because I love having those conversations with students, but you can also run into some challenges saying, you know, this is a different strategy than you've experienced before, and students can be a little uncomfortable with, like, what does it mean that, you know, I got meets expectations on this assignment? Did I get an A? Like, you're like, you did the work that you needed. You've done satisfactory work in this class. We can move on and think about building on those skills later. And you're like, but did I get an A? So it doesn't exist in a vacuum, but I think one of the advantages for me of having the Canvas grading outcomes is that it provided a vocabulary and a structure for expressing how students were aligning with course goals. So the slides that are linked on our document have a hyperlink to more of the information about how I set up the contract for a course. But I think the main thing I want to emphasize in this discussion is that shifting to Canvas outcomes was a rhetorical move on my part. In the most minimalist sense, when I did Canvas outcomes, I actually set up a complete incomplete grade and a meets expectations or revise and resubmit option for students each time there was an assignment or a scaffolding assignment. And I would direct students more to the comments that I had, the qualitative comments about their writing, than to the structured, yes, you did the thing response. And I think that's actually what outcomes allowed me to do a little bit more effectively than a letter grade, or only a complete or incomplete mark would do. I wanted students to be able to demonstrate later on that they've taken my feedback into account. And here's a screencast that I provide for students kind of explaining how the revisions work. And I think that explicitly directing them to, here's what you did well, helped me accomplish that. So you can see here, this is a kind of minimalist approach to Canvas outcomes. Here is where you stand in the class in relation to this assignment. I've also experimented a little bit with creating a more detailed rubric for students. So saying, hey, in this portfolio where you had multiple different assignment components, you might need to revise and resubmit your assignment. And that's a great thing because you're deliberately focusing on skill sets that you didn't demonstrate in the last instance. Here is a visual representation of where you need to work, or where you need to look. And here's this big stack of zeros, because all of these are working together but not quantified. That leads to a holistic assignment outcome. Like, you might have done a really great job on everything and struggled a little bit on the cover letter revision for this course, and that's actually okay. But you need to kind of have that moment where you say, like, ooh, in the future, I'm going to need to work on this a little bit more carefully. I still achieved a positive outcome in terms of needing to complete or revise the work, insofar as I don't have to revise and resubmit. But I do know that next time I'm writing a cover letter, I might send an email to my instructor and say, can we meet during office hours? Which actually happened several times. My first semester trying to import this contract grading and an outcomes-oriented approach in my class had some mixed results. I think largely that was because I was being a little bit overambitious and dewy-eyed about what contracted grading could do to shift the power dynamics of the classroom. And I was actually really pleased that students articulated that they liked not having the sense that they were always being graded on their writing when they were trying to experiment and felt vulnerable. And they like explicitly said they felt that the shift away from grades and toward qualitative statements helped them be more comfortable taking risks in their work. But I think both of us were confused at times about how all of the pieces fit together and what all of the assessments meant. So something that helped me as I kind of revamped the way that I approached this was walking a colleague through the way that I had approached the different course outcomes and turning to my community of practice to better articulate what I was doing. And what that turned into was a better way of understanding what a complete assignment versus a meets expectations assignment meant for my class. And I was able to do a lot more to include students in generating those course outcomes in later semesters. So I began to import more activities where students would list their goals for their revision and draw that list of statements that students wanted to incorporate into their sequence into the assessment rubrics that I would design. So being able to say, hey, I know that you have all the components of this assignment. What would make the difference between an effective versus ineffective instance of this assignment? You tell me. What have we learned in class, and what do we prioritize in this class, and how do we turn that into something that all of us understand? I also kind of thought differently about the different approaches to using Canvas outcomes. One of the approaches that I found helpful in a course that required portfolios, which are an aggregation of multiple different assignments, is that I was able to help students track how well they met the expectations of each of those separate components, which can get lost when you give an aggregate grade. I was also able to articulate skill sets associated with each assignment, kind of like the demonstration I gave at the very beginning of this. Here's the critical thinking or evidence approach. I found it difficult to do both of those at the same time because it can get very unwieldy. So that, to me, became something to set up in different assignments in different ways. But I do feel like it helped me understand more of my role as an instructor and to draw students into the assessment process a little bit more actively. And it also forced me to articulate with them what it was that the class was doing in a way that I hadn't done as actively in past semesters. So that process of creating those outcomes became a lot more pedagogically effective for me, and hopefully for them, but definitely for me, as I use this tool over and over again, even in the sort of minimalist way that I have been using it in my course. And so here's the point where I want to draw from your communal expertise and ask a little bit more about how you see this structure of outcomes fitting into, say, a larger course or a different convention, or a course that might raise some more prominent challenges for you, like what concerns do you have about this? And so I'd like to turn to the assembled group and ask some questions. Like, would you mind sharing your name and your campus role? And how might campus outcomes fit into a course you've worked with or taken in the past? So you can reflect on your experience as a student. Maybe you would much prefer a different way of incorporating campus outcomes into your course. Maybe you want that numeric element. Or maybe as an instructor, you're wondering how to import this approach into your own grading scheme that maybe works really well.
So I'll start because I've got questions and thoughts. Sorry. John Martin, Do It Academic Technology, and I love the way that you want to change the rubric from the numbers the numbers can be sort of a punitive thing, right? And so I love that you took it off, but I also like the idea of somehow representing opportunities for growth in another way. So as you were talking about that, I was thinking of like, well, what about like a bar graph, where it's like, here's the one that you can, you're almost at the top, you're almost perfect, but this one you can use more. Is there a way to do that without having sort of that numbers represented? And it'd be sort of an interesting thing to dig into, like, here's an opportunity for, to push the needle farther without having the, like, point whatever elements.
I think to some degree the way that a rubric still forces you to choose in kind of a Likert scale of, great job, fine job, try again. There is kind of this visual representation in the larger chart of, hey, you did a really good job with your narrative. You didn't do a very good job understanding the objectives of a revised narrative. Those are sort of different things. You didn't do enough to change your story according to the way we framed this in this class. So even though you wrote a really good story, next time you do a revision, think about ways you can do it in a more global way. That resonates with me, that you're nearly there, the visual representation aspect. I think in this particular class, because I was experimenting with face-to-face, hey, here's what you're still struggling with, and I would write that in my end comments or save that in my screencast, it became a lot easier for me to make sure I hammered that point home, but I think it wouldn't scale because doing screencasts took me so long that I wanted to cry a lot. So
having a sobbing instructor on video is no good.
Yeah.
But the idea of having like an immediate representation of the students, because in narrative feedback, at least I tend to think of like, oh, here's this, and here's how I'm doing on this, and here's this, and here's how I'm doing on this, but I don't get the zeitgeist, the gestalt, the whatever that's not one of those is the wrong word. The immediate, right? I don't get the immediate, like, oh, here's where I should focus, and here I'm okay.
And we know that narrative feedback students are often apt to miss like soft-pedaled criticism or things like that. So different students interpret that very differently. Anyway, I also, though, I would like to know more about what people think about whether some of those same concerns exist for a rubric, especially a rubric that's kind of 0 points for everything.
If I can jump in, my name is if I also would do it, I do not actually teach, but I try to present this product canvas. Could you maybe back up to maybe the very beginning of the presentation and like help me understand the distinction between this outcome and the rubric? Because to me, I've always used those as pretty much interchangeable terms, but I'm assuming I'm missing something, and you're showing me a space there, an outcome that I had really never explored before.
Well, so I actually can tell you I don't really use the Canvas rubrics, so some of my answer is going to be colored by the fact that I only use outcomes.
Okay.
But insofar as there is the opportunity to import the same outcomes in different configurations into a individual Canvas assignment. So I could say, like, here are the outcomes for this course, and when I'm making basically a rubric using that outcomes plane, I'd be able to say, like, here's the array of outcomes that I've specified in advance, and then kind of hodgepodge them together. And
do the students see these outcomes?
Yes, they do.
Within Canvas, they see the outcomes.
Yes, you are able to say, like, assign a rubric to this and then draw in those outcomes.
I just say, and I know they see the rubric attached to a given assignment. And I'm just not sure how to get them to see the outcomes without it being in a rubric form. But maybe now's not maybe the time to get into that. So
I would actually love to hear from people who use it in a little bit more of a range of ways. Frankly, the way that I use the outcomes is to create a descriptive rubric with, I think, maybe a different rhetorical force and a different rhetorical framing behind it.
gotcha. And I'll work with that. Thank you, and I will not hijack the conversation. On this course, though, you said this English 100, right? Is this like a large course?
No, it's very small. It's 19 students.
Okay, so
and that's one of the reasons.
19, so it's not like you just.
But that's a section, right? The course itself, English
Oh,
100.
the course is massive.
Okay,
Yeah,
so this is
this
just
is
something you're using in your little pocket of that world.
Yes. But I know that partly because this is a course that has one instructor is assigned to 19 students. Sometimes instructors will teach 2 English 100 courses, but that's a little bit rare. And those courses meet 3 times, and the grading load is massive.
A lot of reading, yeah, I was gonna say.
So there is a lot of interaction between students and instructors, and I don't think that the ways that I've been able to incorporate individualized goal setting with specific students would scale beyond, you know,
And I will say, I also like really appreciate your attempt to attack that single grade concept, because like how incomplete and imperfect is that, especially in a not hard, rigid science math kind of spectrum. So would it be fair to say that this that you are devising, this really doesn't have much application at all in more hard science, right? I mean,
No, yeah, it can very
in
much.
science, you got pretty much you got the right answer, you don't have the right answer. So that'd be interesting. So like.
But the process of moving towards that right answers can be very, like, we don't just want, in any area, and especially in the science, we don't just want you to have the right answer. We want you to be able to develop scientific thinking and approaches and processes and such.
All right. Okay, that's cool.
I think this allows you to kind of say, hey, there are different kinds of students. Even if there's a student who gains a B in a class and so does their roommate, there's going to be a lot of different skill sets that feed into that same grade, and to be able to represent that visually is really important. I'd also say that one other application that I think a lot about in terms of writing is that my goal at the end of this class is for none of my students to ever say I am a bad writer again, because I think that's a pernicious self-identification. Like, all of us are bad writers in some ways, and that's a false concept that many people internalize from poor grades in writing classrooms. And I think the same thing applies to a science classroom. I can think about my own past struggles in mathematics courses, where I identified so much with the grade that I was unable to see that, like, I'm actually quite good at.
You were doing okay with logical pattern 1, 2.
Exactly.
And maybe it's not 3 and 5.
So if an instructor is deliberately trying to frame that for their students by articulating these outcomes really carefully, it might help to shift some of the losses of student interest that happen when people disidentify with a subject.
I'm going to capture these. Who's next?
So I'm Julie Johnson. I have taught in the Ed Psych department, and I'm currently with Do It. And so just to clarify, you're not using SpeedGrader.
I do use SpeedGrader, and that's where I put the rubrics. So,
but the outcomes are only visible in your SpeedGrader process if you import them into a rubric, correct? Okay. Yeah. Okay, that helps. So also, sorry, yeah, go ahead. Can I ask? So So could you have multiple assignments throughout the semester that each have their own rubric, but you would throw the same outcomes into them, and then you would get feedback on those outcomes separately, but somehow maybe you could track your change over time in that outcome?
I don't know about change over time, but I do know that they can aggregate your performance over the course of the semester. And a lot of times people will use outcomes to import, say, common core standards for a course and be able to measure in that way.
When you say they can, what's the they? Like the software Canvas will allow the aggregation of this feedback across multiple assignments?
When you're creating that, and this is where my experience gets rather thin, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But each time you create an outcome, you kind of say, here's how you demonstrate mastery in that outcome, and then you enter in, here's how the different points can fit together if you exceed expectations versus meet expectations. And here at the bottom of this is this little percentage where you kind of say, hey Canvas, please process this information over the course of the semester in a really specific way that allows students to see an average or you might be more familiar with the math of that.
All right.
I was just wondering if you could have actual examples of that.
In terms of, like student examples, or I can show you.
When you see or what they see, like,
I have the same kind of questions as like, like, what's the difference between outcomes and rubrics? Like, can we actually see what it looks like?
Yes. So student privacy.
So one of the things about outcomes is, so every course has, or should have, learning outcomes for the whole course, sort of like the big things. What do the students get out of this? And so those are like sort of at the big level. This is high level, what do we want students to get? Now, in an ideal world, every assignment that you have should somehow feed back to, oh, this shows this outcome, this shows this outcome, and this shows this outcome. So maybe week one you have, or the first third of the semester, we're going to cover this first major learning outcome with 7 different assignments that each have rubrics that each point to a different part of this big outcome. And that's the way to sort of like think of rubrics as sort of a micro version of the macro outcome. That would be one way to do that. And that's why there's that deep connection between outcomes and rubrics. And you can pull in this rubric, we're going to dig into this category of, well, let's take Wisconsin experience, intellectual confidence. So we're going to, we want you to lead with intellectual confidence. In this rubric, we're going to talk about 5 different ways. And for your assignment, I want you to cover these 5 different areas of intellectual competence. And those are each individually separated. So you can think of like it as goals and objectives. The big goals do this, the objectives is part of that, or the milestones to reach for that would be part of the rubric. So that's sort of the way that, at least that I understand rubrics and outcomes.
So when you create an outcome, it's just one outcome. And you can put that one outcome into a rubric. So like, if you created a rubric, and you can choose that one outcome to put inside of that rubric, or if you have like 3 course outcomes and you created an assignment that touches sort of on all of those, like mastering course content, arguing scientifically, you created an assignment that touches on both of those, then you can import both outcome 1 and outcome 2 into that one rubric.
Here's what the minimalist representation is for something that just spits out the most relevant information on this very small, like meets expectations version. I've covered up the student's name and question, but like what I'd like to demonstrate is that I'm using complete and meets expectations slightly differently to try and say, like, I've assigned a rubric that's, hey, in this portfolio 2 submission, I can mark everything complete right away to say I recognize that all of you have completed the different components of your work, or 3 students might have forgotten the 3rd component, and then I can get to them right away and be like, I have assessed that some of you need to get back to me tonight with that missing assignment component. And then afterward, they can see when I do assess using SpeedGrader and additional comments, they can get this very small encapsulation or representation of how I've marked their outcomes, and then turn to that qualitative feedback after that. With a larger array, this is just a rubric that uses only one outcome, but in the example, oops, that's not the button I meant to press. In this example up here, this is a photograph of a rubric that I put together using each of these individual course outcomes.
I think I'm Maria Widmer with this school of ed. I think for me, the piece of it that helped, I was constantly confused about outcomes, and I worked on a project that included a piece that helped me better understand how they might work, which was, I think it's the Learning Mastery Gradebook, which is how we can see a list of the outcomes for the course, and then how a student can see how they're making progress towards mastery of that outcome. The specific project that I worked on for this was a little bit different, which is maybe interesting to see how it can be used in a variety of ways. This was for a major program, undergraduate major, and the instructor wanted students to be able to kind of have a checklist of different requirements for their major, and also to see how those requirements map to the program's standard requirements, I guess. So it was set up as a true-false quiz for each requirement. Did I complete this? Yes. And then that particular requirement was mapped to different standards, so they could see maybe my standard is writing a lesson plan. They could see, okay, I took this class which taught me how to do that, and I took the other thing. So it was more of just like a checklist to see how you're progressing against these different program outcomes.
And am I remembering correctly? You can import you as a group. Say you have a large lecture course or a program as a whole. You can create common course outcomes that then can help you map out how different sections or different courses are fitting into the larger array of outcomes.
Absolutely, and that might be the way that it gets used the most, because in English 100, as the section instructor, you are not setting the goals for that in the course description in the catalog. That is set by the curriculum committee, and there's now a campus effort to sort of propagate that down. So in the example of your Canvas course, there was, as you're going through that, there is the official name and then there is a friendly name category. And as I read that, the official name is, this is what the course category, the official course name is, and it might not be useful. Here's how I interpret this. And then you can adjust the description accordingly and use it. And that might be a way to sort of bridge the needs of the individual instructor and the official top-down course description needs. And for program assessment, that's a perfect way to sort of say, is my class, I think the class is the rubric level and the course as the outcome, the course as form of program outcomes, that might be part of that bigger to smaller grain size.
And I'd also say that even in the individual courses, this can help you express a consistency where students might not otherwise see that consistency. So my pipe dream for if I were teaching this course again would be to sit down with my students and ask them to expand upon each of the learning outcomes that we discuss in the syllabus day, generate them in Canvas together, and then I'd be able to attach audience awareness to all of the different components of the assignment and really articulate that in ways that I was only able to articulate it in class in more descriptive terms otherwise. So something that students struggle with in E100 is being like, well, you're asking me to tell a story. Like, why is that not fluffy? And then your job is to kind of say, like, no, actually, like, this is about storytelling, but it's more about understanding who you're talking to, and that maps directly onto research skills, and here's how we'll make those connections. But I think having the outcomes conversation earlier on and then visually representing it more consistently would be a better way of making that point.
That transparency of like, here are the bigger goals, here's why this isn't just busy work for the students, that's so important, because now they're starting to see the bigger picture instead of, oh, I've got to do this stupid assignment that has nothing to do with anything. Well, if you can say, well, actually, look at this bigger outcome, this is what you're in this course for, because it'll help with the program, so that it's part of the steps, and making that smaller Lego block say, this is important. Without this, we can't make this bigger thing. It helps with metacognition, it helps with the motivation, it helps with their being able to sort of see their pathway and say, oh, okay, so this makes sense. As part of the identity of a discipline.
And in particular, I think this might have an application for courses that are STEM-based courses that import writing across the curriculum approaches into the class. A lot of students respond with, I don't see how all these writing assignments are going to help me with my biology class.
Right. And
being able to really clearly say, you're actually exhibiting these specific creative thinking skills in ways that we can test maybe even more effectively by trying to put them into organized and logically structured sentences. That might help to integrate that different assessment categories in your course a little bit more effectively. Any other introductions that you'd like to share, or should we?
Let's dig into Canvas itself.
Yeah, would you like me to?
Do you want to drive? I mean, I would love it if you wanted to drive.
Oh, would you like to? I think that I'm also sensitive to like not displaying some of the students' stories are a little personal, and so I get a little worried that they.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And we have.
I did a quick search, by the way, and there is a way to run a report on an individual student to see their semesterly summary, kind of summary amalgam of all the ways of their progress on a given outcome.
Can they see that?
You're doing it from the people space. I do not know if they would have. It's over in the little gear icon for a student. You go to the gear icon. There's an option to go to user details. I don't know if they see their own user details in that I don't know. I'd have to look at that.
That's been something I've been wondering for a while, is how to bring them more into that.
Because you're all students in our active teaching.
Oh, would you like to give us some hints?
If you're not enrolled in
Yeah,
our
please.
active teaching course yet,
So-called language seems to imply only the instructor that on this one guide page, I'll say just only the instructor can see that.
Cliff, is that, you said the gear icon? Is that the.
I guess the old document, right? Must be the ... Go to details.
User details?
Yeah. And when it brings up a page, should switch you over to a page for that student. Upper right hand corner, stack of buttons, outcomes report.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Look at that. You're failing, Naomi.
I'm failing. No, I'm not. Very so fine.
So yeah, I don't know if you, how you could make that available to students.
Right.
They could see that.
I'd love to know how people would also maybe provide a written description about how students can use it. Like that's the kind of, I love a model of how to say, here is how you can interact with this cool tool and why.
The outcomes.
Yeah.
Actually, do they even can make the outcome? Yeah, quite another question is, as a student, what can you see? If you make the outcomes visible, what does the student see?
All right, so.
Awesome.
And at the bottom, you can see that quantification across the course, 65 out of 35 became average. most recent result counts as 65% of mastery weight, average of all other results count as 35% of weight. If there's only one result, the single score will be returned. And frankly, that is something I might need a very patient walkthrough to understand how to.
Taking average.
So there's sort of a consensus in the Canvas community, or at least among the people that I've talked to at the Canvas convention of users, that the outcomes tool in Canvas is currently not so wonderful. And the Canvas is aware of this, and I say that on camera, and they are looking at figuring out how to do this. But this is kind of, I think everybody's sort of in this space now where we're moving from the idea of the classroom as sort of a sacred space. You close the door and it's just whatever happens there, happens there. As data becomes easier to get, people are demanding more of it to say, are we all in alignment here? Is this doing what we want it to do? And so tools like this are being developed to help us track this. But in the initial development of any tool, it's not great right away.
I did want to mention, before we leave today, I took some time to get to know the mastery path process, and I think, Maria, that's probably what you were talking about, or similar. Different? Okay.
The city is too close.
Yeah, so there's a tool in Canvas. You have to ask your administrator to turn it on, but it's called Mastery Path, and a lot of school districts are starting to use it because what it does is it allows you to tailor the learning experience to the students based on their performance. And it kind of overlaps somewhat with outcomes. So like, for example, if you started off with a certain assignment and the student performed, they got an 8 out of a 10, you can set it up so that if they get between a 7 and an 8, they have to go back and reread this page, or they have to go back and take this quiz, or both, or one or the other. And then, or if they get 100%, they get to move on to the next assignment, and you can just tailor it in all these different ways. And teachers are using it in kind of really creative ways, like if they want to give students the option of a novel to read in a semester, for example, like, hey, you can pick from this one or this one. They'll have them take a quiz at the beginning that says, like, which novel are you going to read? And based on the selection they make in that quiz, it can send them down the track of assignments for novel 1 or send them down the track of assignments for novel 2. And it's kind of cool.
In K-12, is this, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, individual assessment plans? Individual something plans. But teachers do this for every student in their class, increasingly. And it used to be just for sort of some of the more troubled or challenging students. So I'm sure I had one. But it wasn't, now it's sort of becoming, well, it's working for them, let's expand it. That idea of individual learning paths, this is not something that higher education has ever done, right? We bring people into a classroom and we're like, this is a curriculum, you're all going to do it, and you're all going to sort of follow the pace that I envision that you're all going to follow. And if you don't do that, you fail. So that, the paradigm is changing a little bit as we start moving more and more towards personalized learning, which would have been impossible before we had technology, but now that the tools are being built, we're having more opportunities for students to be able to do things like mastery paths, to be able to say like, I think I should go this way, and I'll come out looking like this, a master, but it'll look different than Naomi's path to get to this level of mastery. And that's sort of, if you think about the real world situation, that's where we're all at. We are all in our discipline, we're all a little bit different. We don't have two, top of the world researchers in the same area. They look at, they're experts in different areas, but both within biology, both within whatever the discipline is. And now that's coming down to lower levels.
Is it okay if I show this Learning Mastery Greenbook?
I would love that. In fact, I was going to tag you to bring that faculty in for next semester.
Oh yeah. Great. So this is the Learning Mastery gradebook, which I think the instructor has to actively turn on under
Feature options.
options. And so,
it is an official instructor product.
yes,
Official,
yeah.
Mastery Paths is still in beta, but the Student Mastery Gradebook and the Instructor Mastery Gradebook are both not beta, I believe.
Um, this is my student view here. So here's the normal gradebook view, and then there's a little tab. These are all of the outcome standards. Since this is kind of a complete incomplete, you can see which, I don't know, that's kind of a progress view, and then I did one thing, so I met that standard. From the teacher's view, oh, here's one point of distinction. This is teacher view of the Learning Mastery Gradebook, and you also have to turn it on for students separately so that they can see. This kind of beats what, John, you were talking about, I think, with like a visual representation of progress towards these things. So the teacher can see like how far they're getting along towards a certain outcome.
Each column.
The columns are one outcome, which in this case is
so not necessarily assignments that may each of them cover 2 or 3 of 15 different outcomes.
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
an amalgamation in every. Wow, that's really probably a better representation of for the students to be able to see those. And it's either or. It's the grade books are either or. You either have the traditional grade book, or you hit the switch, and now you start using this other one.
it's an and.
It's an and.
You have the
it
traditional
is.
grade book, and then
Oh.
there's that tab.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. It's a tab in the grade book. Grade book. Oh.
So I just turned them all on. The individual, the Learning Mastery. This is what it looks like in my gradebook. Learning Mastery individual gradebook history. Yeah. And this is the new gradebook. I just turned that on as well. So I can now look at students and arrange by different lowest to highest. So it's sortable in a different way. I feel like there's so much that we can talk about here. And the amount of time, honestly, that I looked into this is, well, you've just witnessed it, right? So there is a lot. We're so appreciative of having people come in who have started to even dip their toes in, because I think that it's complicated stuff. And I don't understand it yet. Julie?
Oh, sorry. You can click the gradebook. I created 2 miscellaneous learning outcomes for our yeah. Yeah.
Hey, all right. Outcome 2 and outcome 1.
Yeah.
Oh, what's the
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And ours are all wrong.
that's fantastic.
But yeah.
You give students different configurations of assignments to choose from. To meet those objectives, but this might be a great way for you as an instructor to see if the way that you're assessing a particular different assignment area is consistent as well. So you're trying to assess similar qualities in the different options that they have, but you could also see if something you're doing is unbalanced.
The other day on Black Ultra, and just play with stuff, where we didn't have a presentation, where we just dug in and said, hey, let's figure out the grade book, let's figure out the new grade book, let's figure out mastery paths, or start to figure out mastery paths. I see some smiles and some small nods and a tentative hand wave. Yes, Landon.
I mean, I think that would be a really cool idea, and I'm not certain maybe what I'm going to suggest, how close it is. Active teaching that as it is, but it feels like there should be some sort of direction and goal with that versus let's come in and play versus that's like I'm just kind of going in any pathway. Yeah.
In order to say, I don't even know what we're going to accomplish, what the accomplishment options are.
Yeah. But just like have some impetus to where what I will end up with, and it's like, yes, that is intriguing versus like I can go and play by myself,
Right.
on my own computer and mess around with this stuff and kind of figure it out. And so having like a goal, and then that might be, or even like a narrative at the beginning to give us some sort of like a hook or some sort of like process, but more of like a.
Like, let's learn mastery paths.
Yeah.
Let's learn how to build something that's like measurable to like.
Specific.
Yeah, specific. That I can say, I can now, when I leave there, I'm going to have this. I want an objective, darn it.
John, could you? I'm sorry. So
No, I'm done.
Yeah.
Could you go to the outcomes on your navigation bar, just the outcomes option. And because I go to my course and I'm immediately assailed.
Is it intellectual confidence, purposeful action,
No,
relentless
this is
curiosity?
a dummy course. And oh, you know what though? That's funny. This is a dummy course I stole from.
The outcome within that could be the 3 bullet points on how you
A group of essays, a group of reading, research, thesis.
That was your English class, right? Or your
provide sense, but they're all empty.
All right. Well, you're all leaving today with more questions than you came with, so that's good. It's kind of a good session. Please help me in thanking Naomi for coming today. And if you have any specific objectives or outcomes that you'd like to see in a play session, put them down